In 1999, wireless communication was physically fragile. Cellular networks were riddled with dead zones, and walking behind a concrete wall could drop a call. Despite these limitations, the tech industry was obsessed with a specific goal: forcing the heavy, bloated infrastructure of the desktop internet onto those weak mobile networks. For the user, this mismatch was agonizing. Early mobile web pages took minutes to load, the connections crashed under the data load, and none of the transmissions were secure. While the network struggled, manufacturers focused on trivialities. They prioritized color screens and shrinking desktop browsers, ignoring the fundamental physical constraints of the pipes they were using. In Waterloo, Canada, a firm called Research in Motion took a contrarian path. They realized customers didn't need a portable desktop. They needed a secure, instantaneous line of communication. Success in the early mobile era didn't come from shrinking the internet. It came from abandoning the desktop model entirely to build a new type of digital pipe. Mike Lazaridis built that pipe through a specific engineering fixation. He focused on two things above all else: bandwidth efficiency and military-grade security. His partner, Jim Basile, took that engineering and targeted the corporate market, the one group of users who prioritized reliable data over every other feature. The result was the BlackBerry 850. By ignoring images and web browsing, the device could send and receive lightweight text data drops instantly. It made the mobile connection feel fast because it never tried to carry more than the network could handle. Security was built into the hardware itself. Every packet of data was encrypted before it ever left the user's hand, ensuring that even if a signal was intercepted, it was useless. RIM wasn't competing with consumer cell phones. They were selling a cryptographic vault that fit into a suit pocket. To manage this system, RIM routed all user data through their proprietary Network Operations Center, or NOC. Controlling this centralized hub bypassed standard cellular networks' reliability issues. They owned the entire path from device to server. This chart shows the result. As competitors struggled with dropped signals, BlackBerry's market share climbed to 50% of the US smartphone market. Because the system was both fast and encrypted, it became the mandatory standard for high-stakes financial environments like the New York Stock Exchange. From executive boardrooms to political motorcades, the BlackBerry became the primary tool for global leadership. By solving the mobile data constraint through their own infrastructure, BlackBerry became the essential utility for global capitalism. The engineering supremacy that built this monopoly created an equally powerful strategic vulnerability. When a company controls the pipes of a global system, they often succumb to monopoly blindness, the belief that the system they've built is more important than how people actually use it. RIM believed the infrastructure was their product. In their view, the security and efficiency of the pipes mattered most. But as cellular networks improved, the rest of the world stopped caring about the pipes. Users began to care exclusively about the water, the apps, the media, and the personal connectivity flowing through the device. Solving an infrastructure problem makes a company a giant, but falling in love with that infrastructure is fatal when the world's needs evolve. January 2007. Steve Jobs steps onto the Moscone Center stage in San Francisco, unveiling the iPhone. While the tech press cheered in California, 2,500 miles away in Waterloo, Ontario, the mood inside Research in Motion headquarters remained clinical. The engineering leadership greeted the news with dismissive laughter. That laughter stemmed from a fiercely pragmatic engineering culture. For a decade, RIM had dominated the enterprise market, and that long winning streak bred a dangerous overconfidence in their own philosophy. A classic BlackBerry was built for three specific tasks: network efficiency, impenetrable security, and rapid-fire typing. When RIM engineers analyzed the iPhone, they evaluated it against those exact metrics. They saw a device with a massive glass screen that would drain a battery in hours while bypassing secure corporate servers entirely. Internal memos circulated through Waterloo calling the new device an engineering absurdity. It was dismissed as a toy for teenagers, severely penalized by what RIM deemed a terrible virtual keyboard. BlackBerry had all the correct technical data. Their error was in the grading rubric. They were measuring a new category of device using a scorecard from a market that was rapidly disappearing. The leadership team missed the fact that the mobile phone was no longer an isolated tool for communication. If you're building a pure communication tool, development is constrained to 3 metrics: battery life, physical durability, and typing speed. But when the device becomes a mobile computing platform, hardware efficiency is eclipsed by the demand for an app ecosystem and complex software. Every hardware decision Research in Motion made in 2007 was rational under the old model, and every single one of those decisions proved fatal under the new one. You can execute your strategy flawlessly, but if the victory conditions of the market change without you noticing, you are already fighting a lost war. By 2008, the laughter had stopped. The iPhone sales figures were undeniable, and BlackBerry's carrier partners were demanding an immediate response. Navigating an existential threat requires absolute clarity and command. BlackBerry, however, was led by an unusual corporate structure, a dual CEO model. On one side was Mike Lazaridis. He was the technical purist, deeply protective of RIM's core engineering identity and obsessed with preserving bandwidth efficiency. On the other side was Jim Balsillie. He was the aggressive salesman, focused on securing corporate contracts and keeping telecom carriers happy at any cost. When Verizon demanded a touchscreen device, these two leaders pulled the company in opposite directions. Engineering became a tug of war between preserving network purity and rushing a glass screen to market. A divided leadership structure actively sabotages the development process. It forces engineers to build disjointed hardware that attempts to appease two contradictory masters. The direct result of that internal chaos and divided leadership was released in the fall of 2008. The BlackBerry Storm. On the surface, it looked like a direct answer to the iPhone, featuring a large screen that completely removed the iconic physical keyboard. But this schematic reveals exactly where the engineering team compromised. They suspended the rigid glass screen over a physical mechanical button system. They built a touchscreen, but they couldn't let go of the mechanical click. Consumers rejected it immediately. Reviewers were forced to mash that heavy, laggy glass to register a response, fighting against a mechanism that actively resisted their input. The Storm was the physical embodiment of a company tearing its own design philosophy apart. The financial consequences were severe. The complex hardware leaked fat margins, and carrier partners eventually demanded over $1 billion in refunds for returned units. The cultural damage was worse. The once pristine reputation of BlackBerry's engineering division was permanently stained by a device that barely functioned. They took everything that made a BlackBerry reliable and precise and sacrificed it to build a mediocre imitation of their closest rival. In technology, when you compromise your core identity to chase a competitor, you lose the very foundation that made you successful in the first place. This chart shows the state of the mobile market in 2009. BlackBerry controlled exactly half of it. 1 out of every 2 smartphones on Earth carried their logo. The company provided a closed, highly encrypted enterprise security network that fit inside a pocket. The real customers were corporate IT managers. These professionals acted as gatekeepers, choosing which devices were secure enough for company data and ensuring BlackBerry remained the standard. For a decade, carrying one of these was a mandatory badge for the business class. The physical keyboard became the universal symbol of corporate productivity. Success relied on this top-down corporate mandate. Companies bought the devices in bulk, and the employees used what they were given. Then, over the course of just 72 short months, that massive and seemingly untouchable corporate fortress completely imploded. This graph tracks the market share from that 2009 peak. By 2011, share dropped to 25%. In 2013, it was 8%. By 2016, the data point hits 0. To understand how half the world's market share vanishes in 6 years, we have to look past the hardware and at a shift occurring inside the companies themselves. Around 2010, employees began bringing their personal iPhones into the office. This was the start of BYOD, Bring Your Own Device. It was a movement of employees choosing their own technology, rather than accepting what was issued by their employers. These devices offered an intuitive, consumer-first experience that made the utilitarian company BlackBerry feel increasingly outdated. IT departments faced a new kind of pressure as executives and staff alike demanded access to company networks on their personal phones. Eventually, the gatekeepers gave in. IT managers opened the secure networks and allowed the iPhone in. Purchasing power shifted away from the corporate office and into the hands of the individual user, steadily dismantling the fortress from the bottom up. BlackBerry reacted with a disjointed series of hardware releases, attempting to innovate across multiple fronts at once to recapture the market's attention. Their very first major defensive move in this new war was the Playbook tablet. But the device launched with a significant oversight. It was designed for business professionals, yet it lacked a native email application. They tried again with the launch of the BlackBerry 10 operating system. By the time it arrived, the competition was years ahead. The new system launched with an empty app store and struggled to attract users who had already moved on. These hardware projects didn't fail because of poor engineering. They failed because the company did not recognize what the modern end user actually valued. The decline reached its conclusion in 2016, when BlackBerry officially ended its internal hardware design. As market value evaporated, the brand's reputation shifted from a corporate requirement to a case study in failure. Today, the company's story is primarily used as an autopsy in business schools to help students understand how a market leader can vanish. The lesson is clear. A B2B monopoly cannot survive if the people using the product find it frustrating. When you fail to adapt to human behavior, even the strongest empire can fall to zero. In the late 2000s, the smartphone industry was a bloodbath. Dozens of titans who ruled the early mobile era were wiped out. Consumer tastes shifted almost overnight. The retail floors were suddenly packed with glass touchscreens and app stores that older hardware companies simply couldn't compete against. To stay relevant, these struggling companies poured billions of dollars into keeping factories running, managing vast supply chains, and funding global logistics. It was a relentless cash bleed. Making matters worse, the market was flooded. The profit margins for selling a physical plastic gadget were cratering. BlackBerry was caught right in the middle of this trap. If they kept trying to fight the consumer hardware war, they were on a direct path to the exact same bankruptcy as their peers. Building a slightly better gadget with a better keyboard wasn't going to save them. Survival required stopping the financial bleeding completely. So, leadership made a ruthless decision. They completely killed off the consumer hardware division. By amputating physical manufacturing, logistics, and retail marketing, they instantly stopped burning through those billions of dollars. But with the phones gone, leadership had to look at what was left and ask the ultimate question: what is our actual core asset? The answer went all the way back to 1999. Their value was never the plastic device itself. It was the highly reliable, real-time operating architecture running underneath it. They had built a network system that simply did not drop messages. That secure, invisible architecture was their true competitive advantage, and they already had the tool to capitalize on it. Back in 2010, they quietly acquired a highly specialized software company called QNX. This diagram shows what QNX builds: a microkernel operating system. On the left, standard consumer software is tangled. A bug in one app can crash your entire phone. On the right, a microkernel organizes code into strictly isolated geometric nodes. If a single piece of code fails in a microkernel, the isolation barriers stop the error dead in its tracks. The rest of the system keeps running perfectly. You need this level of structural stability in the control rooms for nuclear power plants, where a system freeze triggers a physical catastrophe. It is highly sought after in medical life support equipment. When a machine is breathing for a patient, a software crash is fatal. And it is essential for synchronizing massive infrastructure, like high-speed rail networks, where split-second timing prevents collisions. Buying QNX completely removed BlackBerry from the business of consumer convenience, placing them squarely in the business of physical survival, where there is zero margin for error. Under this new leadership, the company ruthlessly stripped away the final remaining layers of consumer fat. They entirely discarded the low profit margins of phone manufacturing, relying fully on the highly lucrative economics of software. Today, they operate purely as a high-margin cybersecurity powerhouse. Their code runs quietly behind the scenes, securing the data streams and automated networks that run modern global infrastructure. The total collapse of their famous physical gadget was the precise mechanism that forced them to isolate and scale their underlying software DNA. They survived by realizing that their greatest asset was invisible, abandoning the physical product entirely to become the hidden foundation the world relies on. For over a century, we understood cars as purely physical machines. You pressed a pedal, a steel cable pulled a throttle, and gears ground together in a bath of oil. Those mechanical linkages are gone. Today's electric and autonomous vehicles operate as fully interconnected digital networks rolling down the highway. A modern digital cockpit processes terabytes of information every hour. It juggles feeds from environmental sensors, coordinates complex battery thermodynamics, and calculates automated braking in real time. In reality, these vehicles have become high-capacity enterprise server farms on wheels. That creates a massive engineering problem. Standard software architectures are notoriously fragile. They experience latency, they freeze under heavy processing loads, and they are highly vulnerable to external hacking attempts. When your desktop computer crashes, you lose a spreadsheet. If your vehicle's operating system drops a steering input for half a second at 70 miles an hour, the physical consequences are fatal. The autonomous transportation industry quickly realized they couldn't move forward without a zero-fail, zero-latency software foundation. They needed an operating system that absolutely could not be compromised. Public perception suggests the company that built this phone was wiped off the map during the smartphone wars. Instead of fighting a losing battle against Apple and Google for space in your pocket, BlackBerry quietly retreated and solved the automotive industry's highest stakes engineering problem. They extracted the military-grade corporate security protocols from their obsolete hardware and injected that code directly into vehicle networks. The company's enduring value lay in the underlying security logic designed to protect sensitive data, regardless of the hardware housing it. This led to the creation of BlackBerry QNX, an operating system that isolates and protects a vehicle's most critical functions. By building an airtight wall between internal systems, QNX ensures a glitching Spotify app on your dashboard cannot freeze the computer controlling your anti-lock brakes. From that secure base, they partnered deep with Amazon Web Services to build Ivy. This protocol takes all that raw, real-time vehicle sensor data, standardizes it, and securely pushes it to external cloud servers for processing. Executing this pivot meant BlackBerry had to abandon their costly physical manufacturing facilities entirely, shifting their workforce toward coding and digital infrastructure. This chart tracks the result of that transition. We see a steep, dramatic upward trend in profitability, with BlackBerry's gross margins surging past 60 and 70% as they shed their physical manufacturing costs. By willingly stepping out of the consumer spotlight, the company achieved a level of weightless profitability they never could have reached building plastic phones. This architecture now serves as the mandatory baseline standard for the entire global automotive industry. Major European automotive giants, like Volkswagen, rely entirely on BlackBerry to run the safety-critical systems for their next-generation fleets. The operating system is integrated directly into the high-volume production lines of dominant Asian manufacturers, including Toyota. And legacy American institutions like General Motors depend on this exact same framework to manage their massive transition to electric vehicles. 24 of the top 25 EV manufacturers now use the software, securing a network of over 235 million vehicles globally. The same architecture that prevents a dashboard from crashing a car's brakes also prevents unauthorized access in other high-stakes environments. BlackBerry took these hardened security protocols and deployed them to protect global banks, government agencies, and defense systems from advanced cyber warfare. Modern technological dominance looks like an invisible, unhackable infrastructure that global society requires to function safely. In the early 2000s, corporate success had a specific sound: the rapid clicking of thumbs on plastic keys. Owning one of these devices signaled that your time was valuable and your work was critical. Then came the glass screens. Within a few short years of the iPhone's debut, the physical keyboard went from a status symbol to a relic, and the company behind it watched its market share evaporate. The public consensus was absolute. The company lost the smartphone war, ran out of relevance, and quietly closed up shop to become a footnote in tech history. Except they didn't. They are alive, highly profitable, and operating at a massive scale right under our noses. When we hear the name BlackBerry, we immediately picture this, a plastic rectangle with a QWERTY keyboard. But today, the technology keeping BlackBerry alive lives here, hidden inside the digital nervous system of modern vehicles. Their near collapse happened because of a mismatch between their internal culture and the changing market. They assumed they were a hardware manufacturer. Mistaking the plastic shell they sold for the actual value they provided blinded them to the market shift. Surviving required recognizing the difference between the two. At their peak, BlackBerry's leadership leaned into the celebrity status of consumer tech. They stood on stages presenting shiny new models to retail crowds, prioritizing their identity as a lifestyle brand. They fixated on the physical object. They believed people were buying the satisfying click of the keys and the shape of the bezel. But their engineering philosophy was the secure architecture moving data without interception, the software routing the information. When the hardware side was shattered by touchscreens, leadership continued pouring resources into new phones, leaving their most resilient asset largely unutilized. By the time they realized the market was shifting toward software platforms, they had already spent years of development capital trying to defend a hardware-centric world that no longer existed. To stop the bleeding, they had to make a brutal choice. They officially retired the iconic consumer brand and stopped trying to sell phones entirely. They stripped away the cameras, the screens, and the keyboards. What remained was their survival DNA, the raw, highly secure engineering architecture. They took that architecture and retreated from the consumer spotlight. They shifted their focus to selling infrastructure directly to other businesses. They found their landing zone in the automotive sector. They repurposed their secure software to run the complex operating systems of connected cars, operating under the name QNX. Killing their most famous creation was painful, but mathematically, shedding that massive hardware overhead was the only way to keep the underlying company alive. This chart plots BlackBerry's phone sales against automotive software integrations. As hardware flatlines, QNX software climbs into hundreds of millions of vehicles. This invisible software market is profitable and stable. Car operating systems require rigid security and long-term contracts, shielding them from fickle retail trends. You will never see a BlackBerry logo on your steering wheel, yet their code is managing everything from advanced driver assistance systems to digital instrument clusters. BlackBerry's survival indicates that a company's longevity may no longer depend on its presence in a consumer's pocket, but on its integration into the background systems of their daily life. We often expect a comeback to look like a revenge tour. We assume success means returning to the exact arena you lost in and reclaiming your crown. BlackBerry survived by doing what few companies have the stomach for, intentionally dismantling their most famous public asset to salvage the utility beneath it. Winning the future required stepping out of the spotlight and leaving the smartphone wars behind permanently. They moved out of the spotlight and into the complex, invisible layers of modern transportation. They proved that a comeback isn't about the charts. Sometimes it means building a foundation in the places where no one thinks to look.
If you enjoyed this mini, subscribe right now so you don't miss the next one. Drop a like, share it with a friend, and comment your thoughts. What would you do? All right, subscribe, like, comment, and share. Thanks for being here.